Hello, everyone, and welcome. We should be live at this point, so let me make double sure that we are muted. And yes, it says we have an excellent connection, and we are now live. So yeah, very, very welcome. Thank you all for being here. And yeah, so I'm joined today by Thunderous One. The topic is going to be Islamic Moonotheism, which I've covered on 3 other channels, just not on my own, and it's time that I do this on my channel. So thank you for those who are here. XYZ, thank you for the support. Josie Wales, Veronica at the Well, and I believe, okay, well, those are the names I see, and Thunderous, welcome.
Hi everybody. Hi Lloyd. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well, yeah. How have you, well, how was your day?
My day's okay. Looking forward to the show and discussing Islam and monotheism and the monopoly that Islam has on this faith system.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, guys, yeah. So some of you may have seen this. However, I need to repeat this on my channel, but we're going to be talking about the early beginnings of Islam, basically proto-Islam, and how Islam originally started or evolved out of Babylonian Moonotheism, out of Babylonian moon worship. Now, that particular thesis has been discussed for a couple of decades. However, it actually is very credible, and as we go through the series, we will discover why. And I think you will find more information here than has been presented up to now, and I will provide all the resources in the description or in the comments later. All right, and here we are. So, Islamic monotheism and the moon gods of Babylon. So we'll be talking about Yemen, Ethiopia, Abraham, and Makkah, or Al-Makkah, and we'll learn about Al-Makkah. Yes, Veronica at the Well, these images, yes, you'll notice these are the early pagan images from Yemen and from Ethiopia. So notice you'll see here the crescent and the early star. In some cases, they're a sun disk, but they're also a star disk. So yes, these are early images that date to the first millennium BC. This symbolism goes way back. Your thoughts, Thunders?
Yeah, I was just going to say we're talking about Ethiopia and Yemen and Saudi Arabia, but in my research, which I did many years ago, the image of the crescent-shaped moon, the world in archaeology seems to be replete with this and pagan idolatry. So it's not geographically restricted to one area or one period of time either. History shows that this symbol seems to be a consistency through history and man's fascination with worshipping the stellar objects.
Agreed. Very agreed. Very much agreed. Yeah, and this is actually a photo taken of a mosque with the moon in the background. Maybe it was photoshopped. However, uh, I will say this: in Christianity, we revere the cross. So the cross sits on top of our churches. It's on the walls of the churches. It adorns our holy spaces because we revere the cross. It has meaning, historical as well as spiritual meaning. Islam reveres the moon, which is why the moon is on all of their holy spaces, because it has historical as well as spiritual meaning. I think this is obvious. So hence this is called monotheism. Right, so summary of the overall thesis. We will examine archaeology, history, language, as well as the Islamic sources. Christianity was an early arrival in Arabia and had an impact. However, prior to that, there was Babylonian paganism. Proto-Islam can be traced to Yemeni and Ethiopian paganism. The Ethiopian paganism was brought there from Yemen. Proto-Islam is based on pagan moon worship. The Arabian pagan gods were copies of the Babylonian, Sumerian, and Canaanite gods. We also know that there's no early evidence of Mecca in Arabia, and we will cover that in some depth. There is evidence for many Meccas in Yemen. The main Arabian pagan god, oddly enough, was called Makkah. And you might have heard of a very popular city in Arabia called Makkah. And then, of course, we will have a look at the mystery of Makaraba. This is the location that Islam likes to claim, that Muslims like to claim, was the earliest mention of Mecca in the 2nd century. And we will learn about where Makaraba is and also what Makaraba is. Any comments before I continue, Thunderous?
Do we have any kind of estimated time as to when Christianity actually hit Saudi Arabia or the Arabian
Um,
Peninsula?
they're definitely. So Paul actually was in Nabatea. He was in Petra in the first century. So we know this already from the Gospels. And then you've got a solid presence in Arabia. You're looking at the fourth century at least, if not sooner.
Okay, because I think as far as Muhammad's concerned, the earliest that I can find, I dare say, in Islamic literature, it would be the earliest, and that's his, was it his uncle or his first wife's uncle, Waraka, was a Christian kind of priest of the
Correct.
time.
Well, let's actually have a look at this since this is interesting. This is from the Biblical Archaeology Society. Now, they collect together biblical evidence, archaeological evidence that aligns with the Bible. In this article, the earliest evidence of Christianity in Arabia, I'm about to do a video on this for next week. This is a rock inscription from the Jordanian desert, and it invokes Jesus. You'll see this rock inscription here, and the Jesus portion is actually here, right? And this article I will discuss with you guys later in the week. So this is Petra here. This is Wadi al-Khudari. This is Amman, Jordan. That's Jerusalem here. So this is now in northern Arabia, and this is where this was found, in this field of rocks. And you'll see here, this is the name of Jesus. And it says here, possibly the earliest witness to Christianity in Arabia, the Jesus inscription from the Wadi al-Qadari is a memorial inscription, meaning that it commemorates a deceased person. It consists of three parts. It gives the inscriber's name, a commemoration of the deceased uncle, and concludes with a unique religious invocation to Isa, which corresponds to the name given to Jesus in the Quran, O Isa, help him against those who deny you. So, yeah.
Sorry, that Isa, what language is that in?
Safayitic.
Sorry?
Safayitic.
So it's not an Arab word then. So the Arab's Isa is, that's the proto to Isa, is the Isa. Right.
Yeah, if we have a look here, if we look for the Safayitic, so there are 17 Safayitic words in the Quran right here.
Right. This is interesting, and I don't want to digress. I'll just make this comment for the audience that if we go back to the discussion about Islam and 124,000 prophets, Adam was the first prophet, and he came directly from heaven to earth. He spoke Arabic in heaven, and it would have been the purest form of Arabic that ever existed. And
why
Islam,
aren't we finding Arabic inscriptions?
Exactly that. So we're not finding historically the purest. We're finding that if we go with the Islamic narrative of Adam being the first man on earth, moving towards Muhammad, which incidentally is only 21 generations. So there's a problem there for Muslims, whereas the Bible has 73 from Adam to Jesus. Go figure the mathematics. Or math if you're American.
Yeah. I don't want to dwell too far off because I want to get back to the topic. Yeah.
Yeah. What one comment was is why are we finding the further forward we're going in time, more non-Arabic words in the Quran with what we're discussing, when it should be more Arabic or pure Arabic from when Adam came to earth?
That's a fair question. Yeah, that's a very fair question. So you can see here, there are a number of over 50 different languages represented within the Quran. So I will leave this here for the moment. Okay, guys. So yeah, let's jump forward. Thanks. Those are very good points. Hello, Marek. All right. So I'll start off with Yeha, the Saba kingdom site in Ethiopia. Right. So a Saba kingdom site in Ethiopia. Yeha is a Bronze Age site near Axum in Ethiopia, the largest archaeological site in the Horn of Africa, showing African contact with South Arabia. Welcome, Sergeant Gingrich and Dragon. Welcome. Thank you all. Hello, Marek. Yeah, so what we have is this site that shows us that Africa and Arabia were linked. Now, Saba is the historical Sabaean kingdom of Sheba. We've all heard of the Queen of Sheba. She's very well known from biblical sources, as well as from Islamic sources. Now, Yeha is the precursor to the Ethiopic Axomite Empire. This was at that time the fourth most powerful empire on earth. However, it was also an empire you've never heard of. Right. Son of Aram. Yeah, I asked myself what that Norse word in the Quran is. Yeah, look, you'll have to download a copy of Check in the description. There'll be a link to my Google archive, my full research archive. Go and check out Arthur Jeffrey's Foreign Words in the Quran. Look at the book, figure it out for yourself. Yeah. Okay, now, established in the 8th century BC, this site includes temple, elite residence called Grat Bel Gebri, and rock-cut shaft tombs. Sabaeans, these Saba here, were a Semitic people from an Arabian kingdom in western Yemen. So let me actually just go to a map so that... Right, so while the map is taking a moment to load, okay, here it is, just a slight delay. So let's have a look here at what we're dealing with. So this here is Aksum. This is Mecca up here. This is Aksum down here. This is the Horn of Africa. This is Arabia. This is Sinai Peninsula. This is Egypt. So we are looking at this area down here called Aksum, and this is Yeha. All right. So now the Sabaeans were Semitic people from an Arabian kingdom in western Yemen. So they invaded from Yemen into Ethiopia, and their empire flourished from the 8th century BC approximately to 275 AD. So they were in the first millennium BC up to the 3rd century AD. Now this temple, oddly enough, is known as Al-Makkah Temple. Now, you might notice the similarity to a certain place in Arabia, which is very important in the Islamic religion. And I will make a note that the Yemeni Q sound becomes an Arabic K. So Al-Makkah becomes, in the standard Arabic, Al-Makkah. And Makkah, have you heard of Makkah before, Thunderous?
It rings a bell for some reason.
Yep. And yeah, we're going to be talking about this a lot. So let's have a look at an old map. This is Mecca. This is where the Kaaba is. Okay. Obviously, it's known as Al-Makkah. Here you've got Aksum and Yeha. I'm getting some feedback, Thunderous, I'm getting echo and feedback from your mic.
I'm not sure
hearing
why.
Myself. I'm hearing myself.
Okay, let me just try something else.
Okay, so what I've got here is Axum and Yeha. And what is interesting, as we will discover, is here in Yemen, just below Najran, we have another Al-Makkah temple. And what is interesting is there will be more than one. There were many, many of these Al-Makkah temples. And Al-Makkah was not just, well, it was also a place. So we'll find many of these Makkah temples in southern Arabia. Josie Wells, oh, thank you very much for the comment. It's really worth clicking the links and educating yourself. Lloyd has done the hard work and the deep research. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's continue. Let's have a look at these Sabaeans. Who were these Sabaeans, these Saba? They are mentioned in the Quran. They're also mentioned in the Bible, and we will discuss that. So let's have a Muslim perspective on these Sabaeans. Muslim writer Muhammad Shukri al-Alusi compared their religious practices to Islam in his book Bulugh al-Arab fi Ahwal al-Arab. Arabs during the pre-Islamic period used to practice things that were included in the Islamic Sharia. They, for example, did not marry both a mother and her daughter. They considered marrying two sisters simultaneously to be the most heinous crime. They censured anyone who married his stepmother. And interestingly, these moon-worshipping Sabaeans who copied their religion from Babylon, they made the major Hajj and the minor Umrah pilgrimage to the Kaaba. They performed circumambulation around the Kaaba. They ran 7 times between Mount Safa and Marwa. They threw rocks, and they washed themselves after sexual intercourse. Any thoughts from you, Thunderous?
Well, straight away, that sounds quite alarming that a Muslim writer...
I can barely hear you, Thunderous. Sorry, your audio is very soft now.
I'm using a headset now, so...
I cannot hear you, Thunderous. Try again. Say something, please.
Is that any...
That's much better. Yes, keep going.
Okay, so my first thoughts were that if a Muslim writer is actually looking at Islamic practices today as they are, or as when they were being formulated during Muhammad's time, and he's done research and found that these practices pre-existed, is that not a damning indictment of admission?
I would say 100%. This is from pagan moon worshippers, right? So these are exactly what Muslims do today. These are Islamic practices. Notice, he says, they also gargled. They sniffed water up into their noses. They clipped their fingernails. They removed all pubic hair and performed ritual circumcision. Likewise, they cut off the right hand of a thief and they stoned adulterers. These are Islamic practices as they are today. And this is, thank you very much, BA. And this is the practices of these Sabaean moon worshippers.
So, in effect, that was this concentrated in and around Mecca, these practices at the time, or do they originate elsewhere, or were they
We'll
sort
get
of
into
like?
this. So
Okay.
these guys controlled Yemen. These guys controlled Yemen, this area here. They invaded and they took over Ethiopia. However, at one time, they also entered this entire area. One, for commerce, they had trade routes overland, right? Now, they were sailors. They had trade routes going all the way to India and possibly as far as China. And they had trade routes going all the way to Greece, Italy, and into Turkey. And then also they had land routes. And they were certainly present in Yemen. At one time, they conquered and controlled the land, possibly up to the coast right here in Israel. So they controlled all of this area here at one time. Yeah. So perhaps there's another belief ideology that do these things. And this was pre-Islamic Yemeni moon worshipping pagans. Exactly, Josie Wales.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, there was a lot of mixing, a lot of spreading of these ideas. Let's continue. The Sabaeans have 5 prayers similar to the 5 prayers of the Muslims. Okay, now what a coincidence. Others say they have 7 prayers, 5 of which are comparable to the prayers of the Muslims with regard to time, that is morning, noon, afternoon, evening, and night. And the 6th is at midnight, and the 7th at forenoon. Now, those who are practicing Muslims and those who know Islam a little bit will know that you don't have to do just 5 prayers. You can do 2 additional prayers, which will give you extra reward. Do you know anything about that, Thunderous?
I've never come across that before, but I did want to ask a question.
Hmm.
So, this seems all like grafted on into Islam under a very thin veneer. It's basically paganism with a thin veneer of
Yes,
monotheism.
and
But
that's what we're going to be discovering. This is going to be a
let's
lengthy series. We're looking at about 8 hours of content over several weeks. But yes, this is what we're going to learn, that Islamic practices, as they are today, derive originally from pagan moon worship.
Okay, so if the rationale is to be explained to, say, a Muslim that's listening, or for anybody that's going to take this information to a Muslim, the Quran has the account of Muhammad going to heaven and he's bartering
Yeah,
with Allah from 50 to 5 prayers. Is that the justification to get the 5 prayers,
we
or
would have
these
to
five
ask those.
prayers?
We would have to ask those questions, but perhaps they would have to try and explain it away so that people look to that story rather than the fact that it is actually derived from
That's
Babylonian
the
pagan moon
point.
worship.
That's the point I'm trying to get at.
Yes,
Exactly.
that's a fair point. Yep. So now, it is their practice to pray over the dead without kneeling down or even bending the knee. They also fast for one lunar month of 30 days. They start their fast at the last watch of the night and continue till the setting of the sun. That may sound familiar to you. Some of their sects fast during the month of Ramadan. They face the Kaaba when they pray. They venerate Mecca and believe in making the pilgrimage to it. They consider dead bodies, blood, and the flesh of pigs as unlawful. They also forbid marriage for the same reasons as do Muslims. That's in volume 1, page 121 to 122. Lydia, were there any child sacrifices? There may have been. We'll get to that later. We'll touch on that. I don't know if it's strictly relevant, but we will head in that direction. We will be talking about Baal, and we will be talking about Moloch. So that will come up later. There is a connection to Islam as well. Now, in Bulkh al-Arab fi Ahwal al-Arab, we read, the 4 sacred months, Rajab, Dhu al-Qada, Dhu al-Hijjah, and Muharram, had been considered sacred during the pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah. Raids, taking revenge, war, fighting, and disputes were forbidden during them. Does this sound familiar?
Well, you used the word jahiliyyah. I was just trying to work out myself. How could it be a period of ignorance if all of these practices are grafted into Islam?
Exactly. That's a fair question. If Islam is copying these practices, how are they ignorant if Islam is duplicating them? Now, raids. Now, this will all be explained in the future as we go, but raids, taking revenge, war, fighting, and disputes were forbidden during them. If a man were to meet his enemy who killed his father or brother during these months, he would not quarrel with him. During the sacred months, people were under restriction not to fight or make raids and had to remove their spearheads as a sign that they would avoid fighting at all costs. Of course, the corollary of this is that not during the sacred months, They were raiding. Muhammad was a raider. They were taking revenge. There was war. There was fighting. There were disputes. This is jihad. And we will get to that as we go. Thank you, XYZ. Yeah. So obviously, Islam borrowed the hallowing of these months from pre-Islamic Arabs and introduced nothing new into the world. Abdullah Abdal Fadi, in his article or book, Is the Quran Infallible? Page 127. All right. Any comment before I go on, Thunderous?
No, go on, go on.
All right. Okay. Now let's have a look at Al-Makkah briefly. Let's look at the proper noun, his name. Now we will be dealing with Al-Makkah continuously as we go. We'll be filling in more and more blanks as we go. The name is Semitic, and in the Sabaean it's Al-Muk. You'll find we'll go through at least a dozen versions of this name. Josie Wells, brilliant point, Thunderous One. I think you hit a home run there. Time of ignorance, but we'll copy them anyway. Fact. So this is Al-Makkah right here. And this is the Ethiopic, the Ge'ez. Remember, these guys invaded Ethiopia, and from the Ge'ez you'll see the very strong similarities in the writing. So this is Al-Makkah, Al-Mak, right? And he has at least a dozen different names. Now, he's a moon god, once worshipped in Yemen, Saba or Sheba, and in Ethiopia, in Axum. In his synonyms, amongst many others, are Al-Makkah or Al-Muk, right? Now, the Sabaean capital. Now, also, look up the current name of Mecca. It's Al-Makkah Mukarrama, Al-Muk. So both of these names, Al-Makkah, Al-Muk, are both in the current names. The sounds are both in the current names of Mecca today. The noble, right? So the Sabaean capital was Marib, 120 kilometers east of Sanna. Yes, Lydia, it does. A seafaring people, they built great irrigation works, castles, and temples. In a British museum installation on them, they were called the oldest and most important of the South Arabian kingdoms. Okay, and Sabaean, Sabah here, and also in Arabic, the Sabaeans are called the As-Sabaiyun. Right. We shall continue. This is where they were. So this is Marib, the old capital of this region. This is Sanaa, the capital today. Right, and this, you can see Ethiopia is just across the water here. So this is where Marib was. I'll continue. Now, there were many other Al-Makkah temples, and we will come across, again, we'll flesh this out and come back to much of this. Now, dedicated to Al-Makkah, the moon god of Sabah, it measures 14 by 18 by 14 meters, or 40 by 60 by 46 feet. That is the temple to Al-Makkah that we discovered. Being Sabaean, it is similar to the temples of Sabah kingdom capitals, such as the Al-Makkah temple at Sirwa and the Al-Makkah temple in Marib. So now we've got at least two more of these temples. Right, if I go back here, if we go down here, you will see Sirwa and Marib. In fact, if we go to Marib, we'll find two of these temples and another one here at Sirwa. They're just a few kilometers apart. These two are about 1,000 meters apart here. Right, you'll see these two are very, very close. This is the old temple right here. Right, now, after Marib, Sirwa was the most important economic and political center of the kingdom of Sabah at the start of the 1st century BC on the Arabian Peninsula. So they were an economic powerhouse. They were influential. Right? The continuation of ignorance. Yes, guys. Right. And in front of the building was a platform, oddly enough, with 6 pillars called a propylon. This is very important, called a propylon. Grat Gebri, the palace, also once had 6 pillars. Be better. Do you know what Marib means? No, what does Marib mean? I probably have it somewhere in the notes, but I cannot remember offhand. So if you can let us know what Marib means, that'll be very interesting. Thank you. Right. Now, Yeha has been identified as a pre-Axomite occupation. This is based on 19 archaeological inscriptions on stone slabs, altars, and seals found at Yeha, all written in a South Arabian script. Right. Now, what is interesting is that these people, at one time, they had writing, right? They were an advanced civilization. They built dams, they built cities. They traveled all over. They traveled to India, if not China. They traveled all the way up the coast. They traded with the Greeks. They traded with the Romans, right? They were all the way across this coast here. They were all the way up and down here, all the way up this coast. They had writing. And then, for some reason, at the time of Muhammad, writing disappears. Right, which is very odd. And it comes back later. Thunderous?
No, I was just thinking, because you were saying that obviously these people were very well developed for that
Yes.
particular period of time. You get the sense of that because the Queen of Sheba visits Solomon. So there's a good thing there. You have the Ethiopian eunuch in the Book of Acts. But also the trade routes must have been, as you said, set up
Yes.
before Muhammad, because there's historical references of mosques being in China just after Muhammad's death, or maybe 100 years after. You can't do that unless you've already got relationships and the trade route set up.
They
So
had.
if it seems I'm following, I can see in this in the length of in the linear time span, you can see that this had moved on from things that had already existed.
Fair point. That's a very fair point. Yes. Now notice these one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8 pillars. Now, what is important are not the pillars as such, although the pillars certainly have relevance. Understand? What is important are the spaces between the pillars, because you enter from the secular world into the holy world, into the temple, into the what's it? The we'll get to the word later. You enter into the holy section through the spaces. Now let's count the spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 spaces, 7 prayers. Right? So you entered into the pillar. You entered through this false archway, this false door into the temple. Okay? So, center of prosperity. So, ironically, Westerners Muslims claim to this that the practice they don't like had been part of the local culture before Islam. Yes, and we will discover those practices go way, way back. Okay, let's continue. Now, let's look at this. These are the 8 pillars at the Awam temple, okay, to Al-Makkah, the temple of Al-Makkah in Marib. Now, let's look at this one. It's got 6 pillars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This pillar is broken off. 6 pillars will give you 5 spaces. These are your 5 ways to get to God, right? And those are your 5 prayers. So those 5 spaces, 5 prayers, right? 8 pillars, 7 prayers, right? 6. So basically, it's like denominations. It's simply like just denominations of the same pagan church, right? So slight differences between them. Right. Now, let's have a quick mention about this. This site, okay, after Himyar annexed Sabah, right? Himyar and Sabah, these are basically this kingdom here annexed the guys next door to them. That's pretty much what happened here. It was clearly a royal site under the Muqarrabs, right? Under the Muqarrabs, and probably directly under a king. And then you've got this place called Najran. Now, Najran is formerly a Christian town, which was in the south of Mecca. Just yet, it used to be part of Mecca. So used to be part of Yemen, and this was where Christians were very much concentrated. They used to do pilgrimages to this, and also the heretics and the Gnostics were heavily concentrated there. Now, the town of Sirwa seems, on onomastic evidence, this is based on words, right? On onomastic evidence, to have early contained speakers of Arabic. So now we know that these Yemenis had Arabic speakers amongst them. The town played no role in Islamic times, right? So its influence had diminished by then. But its site became a great mythic one for Islamic historians. Now that is really odd, right? And there are frequent citations of Arabic poetry mentioning it. So culturally, it's still very, very important. And it was very important for them. They remembered it. But yeah, your thoughts, Thunderous, before I move on?
Well, my first thought in all of this was you and I have discussed this before about Egyptology, that the narrative was set up in the 1800s, and then any information that comes along to challenge it, they throw it under the bus or they dismiss it. I think good examples, I think it's Jonathan Templeton or David Rahl that challenged the narrative. In this instance, you've clearly done a lot of research. Your resources are impeccable. Do you not find in all of this information that you're looking at that there are historians or archaeologists that challenge each other in what they're finding? Because it seems to me that when you look at history, there are maybe 2 or 3 narratives where they're making an interpretation that fits what their presupposition is. You're looking at this objectively, and you're joining the dots.
Yep.
Do you find that there's a frustration in yourself when you're reading articles that maybe conflict with what the reality is?
So what you find is that the scholars have all of this wealth of information in these silos, right? But they don't connect it to the next item in the next silo. They keep them separate. It's almost like they are unwilling or afraid, or for some reason they refuse to make that connection, to join those
That's
dots.
that was my next question. I was going to say it could either be ignorance or arrogance, but also with Islam, you are playing into the fear factor, and the threat is very real.
Because the information is there, and it's you when you read the language, you get the feeling they don't want to say what the obvious conclusion is.
Yes, exactly.
So let's have a quick look at Awam Temple. I'm going to utilize here the Smithsonian Institute, right? It is not Wikipedia, just so we know. Now, Wendell Phillips and his team excavated the great walled enclosure of Mahram Bilqis. Now, the Mahram, that's the word I was wanting earlier. When you go through the pillars, you enter from the secular world into the Mahram, right, the holy space. And Bilqis is the queen of Sheba. The ancient temple of Awam, dedicated to the moon god Al-Makka. Now, it's very important to realize. Now, here, when you spoke of contradiction, Thunderous, I will show dozens of references, dozens, as we go through this discussion, as we go through the episodes of Al-Makka being mentioned as a moon god. Now, there is one outlier, a single outlier, where Al-Makka, the moon god, is termed by two scholars to be a sun god. And Muslims pounce on that. They pounce on it, and they try to the exclusion of all other evidence, more modern evidence, in scriptural evidence, archaeological evidence. They will try to deny that Al-Makka is a moon god, and they will try and make him a sun god. Now, it doesn't help their case, because either way, it's a pagan god, which is ultimately connected to Allah. But all of this will become clear as we go. But here is something, and the moon god theory is so much more, there's so much more data for it, evidence for it, whereas the sun god one is actually very flimsy, and it's easily dealt with. But yes, so there is that. So you do find small contradictions, and sometimes you wonder how they got to this. But I can explain that one, and we will in the future. So now, this Wendell Phillips, who worked for the Smithsonian, he was doing archaeological excavations in 1952 with his team. Then decades later, the government of Yemen invited Marilyn Phillips, his daughter, to continue her brother's work. Okay, her brother. Okay, sorry. So to continue, and this is dated 8 September 2014. I've got some other documents up to about 2017 or 2019 discussing this, but during the war, they had to stop, of course. So let's have a quick look at something. These are called the Raja Jil. You'll sometimes see Raja Lil, okay? So these names occasionally differ, Raja Jil and Raja Lil. Raja Jil columns, or stelae, archaeologists working in Saudi Arabia continue to puzzle over the meaning of more than 50 groups of oddly arranged standing stones, the most famous of which are found at the site of Raja Jil, near the ancient oasis town of Al-Juf. That's up north here. Okay, thought to date to the Chalcolithic period, which is 4500 to 3500 BC. In other words, this is 6,500 years ago. They were raised more than 5,500 years ago by an unknown people. Many pillars are now fallen. Others are tilting heavily. These were erected in Saudi Arabia's Al-Juf province during the 4th millennium BC. Let's have a quick look at what these look like. These are standing stones. Do these look familiar, Thunderous? Didn't we just see... Notice the broken ones next to it. There. The broken stones.
The image hasn't come up for me yet.
Take care, XYZ. Thanks for being here.
There we go.
Right. Do you see these standing stones? So this is in Saudi Arabia, and in Yemen, you had the religion with standing stones as a sign to their god. These look familiar?
Yeah.
So these are from a people from 5,000-6,000 years ago. Very similar, yeah. Now, Al-Juf was a significant stopover point on several ancient land trade highways, which connected the Arabian Peninsula, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Syria. It's the Arabic Stonehenge. Josie Wells, you are correct. We will talk a lot about that. I will show you, for instance, there are at least 50,000 such sites in Arabia. 50,000. Right? We will cover that later. So, but yes, it is very much a Neolithic site. Correct. So one trade route, one of the oldest land routes in recorded history, ran from Yemen and parallel to the Red Sea coast through Medina. Okay, what is called Medina today? Alula and Madain Saleh. Okay, let's have a quick look. So we've got Medina. We all know where Medina is, right? You've got Mecca and Medina, right? Here we go. So Mecca, let's go Mecca to Medina. Let's just make sure we have all of that marked correctly. Mecca to Medina. Okay, so Medina up north, this is Mecca here in the south. Okay, that's Mecca to Medina on the map. Okay, they mention Al-Ula as well, Al-Ula, which is going to be very important, and also Madain Sari. But so here you've got this, right? This was a trade route, a very well-known trade route all the way from Yemen, from this region here, all the way up to here. And they even went as far as inland, up into Syria, up into Turkey, right? They went here and all the way up into Turkey as well. Now, let's actually have a look at Al-Ula. So let's actually have a look. This might be very interesting to you guys. This is Al-Ula in Saudi Arabia. This is Al-Ula. Have a look at this. This is Saudi Arabia. Right? Clearly there was some sort of advanced civilization. You can see there's numerous things like this. But also you're going to find, later on we will discuss Al-Ula, and you're going to see evidence of archaeological sites that go back 7,000 years. Sites like this, far more sophisticated ones. But you'll see sites and excavations of this nature going back thousands of years. Any comment from you?
Not only I personally, and this is my own personal opinion, I challenge the timescales of 7,000 or 6,000 years, but it kind of shows, irrespective of what the timescales are, the advanced knowledge that they will have had in structure and arrangement, also with scale as well.
Yeah.
They're not primitive people, and it shouldn't be considered that they are. Clearly very well advanced.
Yeah. If you look at some of these constructions here, look at some of what they've done here. These people were able to do these things. And also the size of this is like 90 to 100 meters or more in size. These are 100 meters or more in size, right? So that's the kind of thing that you're seeing in Al-Ula, right? So this civilization, which was this Neolithic civilization producing this. Welcome, Eva. Welcome, Jordan. So we're traveling north. Okay, so these guys went to Damascus, they went up to Turkey. Turkey is going to be very, very important for us as well later. So by traveling north and northeast to Al-Juf, then east in this way, the road avoided the harsh sands of the great Nafud Desert, right? And the stones may have indicated the presence of a crossroad and the safer route to take, or they may have been temples. And when we get to Turkey, give me one sec, when we get to Turkey and we talk about a place called Göbekli Tepe, that should make a great deal of sense. But these may well have been temples, because Göbekli Tepe bears similarities to these. Yes, Thunders?
Josie Wales mentions a comment, makes a point, says, wow, it looks like it could be Egyptian. Now, that was something I had actually been pondering on my mind from shows you've done on other channels, that this is all very celestial.
Yes, correct.
But the Egyptian pyramids have an alignment with celestial objects as well. So is there a connection between Egyptology and their structures? Because we're looking at proportions, we're looking at fantastic, technically advanced people in proportion, and their building and architecture. Is there a link?
So tell you what, okay, this is an archaeological examination of the Kaaba. Now, this is getting well ahead, okay, because this is at the very end of the presentation. However, the Kaaba is situated very specifically. This wall of the Kaaba points directly towards the summer sunrise. This side points to the 3 stars, which is the handle of the plow. So it is astrologically aligned. This points to the winter sunset, and this wall points to the rising point of Canopus. Canopus is the second brightest star in the sky. The Kaaba itself represents Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. But not only that, these walls also represent the 4 winds. So it is meteorological as well as astrological. So the alignments of the Kaaba. Okay, so the first of the winds is the Sabah, which is easterly of the Kaaba, facing the wall between the black stone and the southern corner. It blows between summer sunrise and the rising point of Canopus. The second is Janub, which is southerly, and blows from the rising point of Canopus to the winter sunset. So now you've got these points that point to the winds. So this is entirely astrological. I will jump ahead to something else. So we're going well ahead, but since the question has arisen, I'll bring this up. I want you to see this. So this is the Kaaba, right? And what is important is this. Notice these people moving counterclockwise. They actually move counterclockwise around the Kaaba, right? Then notice Sirius, right? And notice the stars in the heaven moving counterclockwise, because the Kaaba is God's abode on earth, whereas this is his abode in heaven. This is the Neolithic belief. And if we continue here, you'll notice here you've got the moon. This is the crescent moon. This is the Kaaba, which is Sirius. Here is the disk of the sun. And the people move counterclockwise around this star.
Is there a connection there? Because in Islamic
Yes.
in Islamic parlance and their narrative, they will say that in Allah's heaven there is a Kaaba there as well,
Yes,
and
correct.
the
And
Kaaba
this is
on
the representation on earth. And this is
but
Allah's Kaaba here.
so when they're talking about heaven, they are implying the spirit realm where Allah exists, but the
Yes.
reality is it's not. It's actually the star Sirius, and the circumambulation represents the celestial objects moving around Sirius
Yeah,
from a
we'll get to that. That's look, that's about 7 hours from now. So let's get to that later.
well, it's difficult, Lloyd, because all these questions start to get raised.
Yeah,
We know
I know.
you know what you're bringing up.
Yeah, I know. So, well, let's continue. So you've seen these here, right? So you've seen these stones, like these pillars. And yes, there is an Egyptian connection. We're not going to dig into that. But notice here, this is Alula. You'll see these. I've shown you some of this stuff, okay? They're called mustatils. So you can do a Saudi Arabia Alula pendant, and you can look up mustatils on Google. Play with that. I'm still working on this particular slide, but that should give you. Now let's briefly talk. I don't want to go too long tonight, guys. So I'll do this one in bite-sized chunks. The propylon. We spoke of those pillars. They're called propylon. They are pillars before or in front of a gate. Yes? Okay. So they come from the word propylae, which are monumental gates or entranceways to a temple or religious complex. A symbolic, secular/religious partition. Now, in the Century Dictionary Encyclopaedia, it tells us in ancient Egyptian architecture, monumental gateway, usually between two towers in outline like truncated pyramids. But the important part is it is an ancient Egyptian practice. It's a monumental gateway, okay? A monumental gateway. In Chambers' 20th Century Dictionary, and these are just two examples, it's a monumental gateway before the entrance of an ancient Egyptian temple. These are derived. So way back in history, these were derived from Egyptian practices. Now, let's have a look. Does this building look familiar, Thunderous? And do you see the monumental gateway, the propylon?
Oh my word! Yeah.
Does anyone know where this building is? Any guess, anybody? Right? So, yes, this might look familiar to you, right? This is I believe it's called the Al-Masjid al-Haram. This is in Jerusalem, right? You'll notice the monumental gateway, the false pillars leading to the mosque, right? And notice here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in front of the door, right? Notice the false pillars in front of the door. That's the dome of the rock, exactly, right? And you've got the propylon in front. Let's continue, right? What about Saturn and the black cube? The north pole of Saturn as a cube. Yeah, look, that's outside of the scope of this discussion. I mean, that remains to be seen. I don't have anything to add on to that at the moment. But that's outside the scope of this particular discussion. Right, Axum. Right, so now, Axum was one of the four great powers alongside Rome, Persia, and China. According to Mani, this is the founder of Manichaeism. Now, Axum was one of the four great powers, and the power you've never heard of. So, in other words, they competed with Rome, Persia, and China. They must have been incredibly powerful. They had influence over Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Arabia, Egypt. And they had extensive trade contacts with Asia and the Mediterranean. The Axomites developed Africa's only indigenous written script called Ge'ez. And this is what they used to make, these little pillars here. They also had pillars in their religion. Let's have a quick look. Sabaeans in Africa. So around the middle of the first millennium BC, there were Sabaeans also in the Horn of Africa. So these Yemenis traveled across into Ethiopia, in the area that later became the realm of Axum, also known as, well, this is Eritrea and Ethiopia, right? And notice the Sabaeans, they were holding to the national cult of Al-Makka, right? The cult of Al-Makka. They were mixed up with various non-Sabaean communities, so they mixed with many, many other communities from the region, as far away as China, possibly, India, Greece. They were definitely involved with Greece and Rome. They were mixed up with various non-Sabaean communities, and it is still much in dispute how one can envisage the actual demographic and political situation. Bigger than the Egyptians? Why have I never heard of them? I don't know. I'm not sure if they were bigger than the Egyptians, but they were a powerful, powerful. I mean, Rome, Persia, China, and these guys. And you've never heard of them. That's crazy. I know. How can one not hear about an empire here that was incredibly powerful? But yeah, let's continue. Now, briefly, these stelae, these little standing stones. Hello, Arnold Nathaniel. Welcome. Right. So, some remarks on the origin of the Axomite stelae, and this is a paper by Rodolfo Fatovich. This paper is to investigate the origins of the Axomite stelae in the light of Near Eastern and African megalithism. Right? So, in other words, these megaliths were all over the Near East, in other words, Arabia. The possible funerary stelae of the 3rd millennium, so they go back 3,000 years, were found in the Negev, so even in Israel, right? The Negev. So, they're associated to cairns of flat stones, 7 to 8 meters in diameter. Cairns of flat stones, these flat stones, we just saw those in Alula, right? These little round cairns of flat stones with the burial in the middle, okay? So at Bab ad-Dahra in Jordan, they were also, here in Jordan, they were all over the place. They were a sanctuary devoted to the ancestor cult from the 4th and the 1st millennia BC in Rizqah in southern Jordan. So in other words, this kind of thing was all over Arabia, from Jordan all the way into Africa. Now, the Axomite Empire. So let's go to National Geographic. Do you have anything you want to say, Thunderous?
No, I just two things. One, I'd never heard of these Axomite people before. To consider they've had an empire, I find that surprising. And second of all, you showed the image of the pillar. How is that any different from an obelisk?
Not very much, because back in the day, right? Back in the day, this was everything here was Egypt. As far as when the maps back in the day, the maps were basically round, and this was all you saw, right? If you go back to old maps, right? And then you had Egypt on the maps, and then everything was sub-Egypto, right, below Egypt. Ethiopia at one time meant or indicated anything below Egypt.
Yeah.
Right? So understand, so these guys inherited from Egypt, even Babylon, right? They all somehow claim, or they have an Egyptian influence. They claim an Egyptian influence. They're tied originally back to Egypt. But what is interesting, what you guys may not understand, there are inscriptions in this area of Africa. This is Egypt here. This is Ethiopia here. Now, this is outside of the scope of this thing, but I'm just going to mention it because I will talk about it another time. You see here, where I've got this Star of David. This is called Soleb. Okay? This location here has the oldest Yahweh inscription, right, in the world. This is where they found the oldest inscription in the world to the god Yahweh, okay? And these people are called the Nomads of Yahweh, and they were the enemies of these guys. The Nomads of Yahweh, they worshipped a god called Yahweh. Hi there, Too Many Marys, welcome. Yeah. So these guys were the Nomads. So this inscription goes back 3,500 years. So in other words, it rivals what we know of the Egyptians. So in other words, Yahweh, the name of the god Yahweh, and the practitioners who followed Yahweh, they go way back in history. They rival these kingdoms. So that's just an aside over there. Right, I'll continue. So National Geographic. The Axamine Empire was a wealthy trading nation in northeastern Africa, achieving prominence by the 1st century. They were unifying and controlling a large territorial state and had access to trade routes linking the Roman Empire to the Middle East and India. And the Axomite Empire introduced Christianity to the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, archaeologists have found evidence of a complex society called the Diamat or Dimit. Now, Dimit has a word. This word, we'll get into that later when we start talking about idol worshippers. And we start talking about the early meaning of where the word Islam comes from. Right? Called Diamat or Dimit, that preceded the rise of Axum by several centuries, based in Yeha. Now, here we've got this Dimit in Yeha, and in the Tigray Highlands, about 50 kilometers northeast of Axum. This will be tied to Islam later. Okay. Now, it was strategically positioned at the crossroads of trade routes from East African coast to the African interior. So this means they were trading into Africa. And trading partners included most of the major states in the known world: Egypt, South Arabia, the Middle East, India, and China. These guys were very evolved, very advanced, very wealthy, and powerful, and also highly influential. So yeah, and their most important commercial trading partner were the Byzantine Romans. I'll pause here. This is where, notice, they controlled at least this region. So they controlled probably further east here, and they controlled, they had influence. At one time they invaded and they took over all of this region and even controlled Mecca, or very nearly controlled Mecca. Your thoughts, Thunderous?
No, I've got no comments on that. This material now is new. Anything to do with Axomite, I have no clueless on.
Yeah. So they were a very powerful, as you can see, seafaring nation. They went all the way up to, again, Greece, Rome, right? So these guys traveled extensively to India, China. So these guys had very strong links. So there was a lot more going on, and these guys were the first to spread Christianity. Now, what is interesting, Christianity is dated, in their case, to probably the late third, early fourth century. So the 200s, these guys were already practicing Christians, and they were spreading Christianity throughout the rest of Arabia. In fact, they took Christianity into Arabia here, as well as south. Yes?
Could I just ask a question? The Axomite, they're clearly responsible for trade and, if you like, networking, if you want to use a better phrase. Now, we're using the term they were very powerful and they were doing business with Greece and Rome and places like that. Is it in context then, just so that I can understand this correctly? America is a powerful country and Amazon is a powerful business company. Are we looking at it in the context of power in a different way? Because when we use the term power, we're looking at it from a powerful country point of view. What we should be looking at the Axomites is maybe a very powerful business point of view.
They were influential, but they also had a strong military. They invaded this area. They took over this area at one time. They controlled this militarily. They controlled this area for about 75 years.
Okay, so it wasn't some kind of Amazon or DHL where they...
No, they were very economically powerful, and even after the military occupation ended, they were still economically influential.
Okay.
Yeah, they still were culturally and economically influential. So now let's have a look at some coins, right? Now all of these pieces will be joined together, right? Coins. Axum was the first African country to mint its own coins, so they were quite advanced. They were in gold, silver, and bronze, and they were in the standard weight categories issued by the Roman Empire, which tells us they were trading with the Romans. They wanted coins of the same value, so they could easily trade. These coins have been recovered in multiple foreign locations as far away as India, and they were also the first Christian kingdom to put crosses on coins. Let's have a look. They were the first Christian kingdom to put crosses on coins. And this is their king. These are crosses on coins. Lydia says, yeah, to be powerful, you have to be ruthless back then. And that makes good sense. Yeah, that makes good sense. So, moon worship. Now, the Axomite ruler was called the Negusa Nagast, the king of kings. Right? And King Ezana, he ruled from roughly 320 to 360 AD. And he converted to Christianity as verified by Axomite coins. This was him. Notice, does that look familiar? Ever seen this symbol before, Thunderous?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like a crescent and a star.
Looks like, yeah, and looks like it's something to do with the Bible. I might be wrong on that.
But yes, so now you've got a crescent and a star. So he was a pagan. So he had coins with a pagan disc and a crescent. His later coins have crosses, right? So the later coins, you can see here again. So he's the first Christian king to put crosses on currency.
Josie Wells asking the question, when was this? About 200 AD?
I just have the date right here, 320 to 360 AD. So look, I mean, you can give or take, I don't know, plus minus 20 years, given the inaccuracies in the history, but this is roughly this period. Okay. These coins date to that period, so this is solid archaeological evidence. All right. And we do know that this kingdom was already practicing Christianity. If not officially, it was practicing Christianity in the 1st century and was strongly Christian by the 4th century, late 3rd century. Yes, Thunderous?
Oh, I was just thinking, I'm just looking at the coins. At the top of the coin, you see the crescent with the star in the middle.
Yeah, that's this one, yeah?
Yeah, it's... I find I'll make a comment maybe in another show about those, but that's amazing. That's revealing. That's exposing.
Yeah. So he was a pagan. He then converted to Christianity and converted all the coins. You can see now he becomes Christian. He now has the cross on the staff. He now has the cross. So he's the first Christian king. Now, Ethiopia is possibly the first Christian state. Its conversion to Christianity dates to roughly the same time as... oh, good grief. What is that state next to Turkey? That was in Armenia. Thanks. So, Axum became the first sub-Saharan African state to embrace Christianity. King Ezana proclaimed Christianity state religion in the early 4th century. And for a century before that, Roman traders had brought knowledge of the Christian religion to the Axomite mercantile network. And this is very important to understand that information travels through mercantile networks. Back in the day, information traveled through trade networks. These guys had a substantial trade network, and the guys before them, the Yemenis, had a substantial trade network, and that is how ideas, including religious ideas, flourished. Wow, Glory, thank you very much. I'm so, Peter, thank you very, very much. I appreciate appreciate that contribution. Thank you. Right. So in the 6th century, Axumite King Caleb sent a force across the Red Sea to subdue the Yemenites. And he dominated South Arabia for about 70 years, and the Byzantine Emperor supported Axum largely due to Yemen's persecution of Christians. They were persecuting Christians here in Najran. So the Yemenis were persecuting Christians in Najran. These guys responded by sending their forces across. They sent across a guy called Abraha, and we don't know, but they may or may not have sent him with a bunch of elephants. You guys may have heard of Abraha. Have you heard of Abraha?
Abraha, that sounds familiar.
The guy that attacked Mecca with the elephants?
No, I'll need to be reminded on that
in
one.
In Islam, so the year of the elephant, Muhammad was born in the year of the elephant. That's the year that Mecca was attacked by King Abraha with his elephants.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, absolutely, because Muhammad was born. Yeah, now you remind me.
Abraha, yeah. Okay, let's continue. He was from Axum. Yes, correct. In fact, he was sent by the emperor, and Abraha went across here, conquered this whole area, took it over, and decided, you know what, I like it. I think I'll stay, and he split off from the king of Axum. So let's continue. Right. So now the first church in Sub-Saharan Africa. So this is where I'll end today. I will continue this section. We'll just finish this, and then we'll end here today. The first church in Sub-Saharan Africa. This is from the Smithsonian Magazine, so it's not Wikipedia. The church unearthed in Ethiopia rewrites the history of Christianity in Africa. Archaeologists can now more closely date when the religion spread to the Axamite Empire. Okay, so let me continue here. Oh, let me just minimize that. So I'm just going to bring up this link. Okay, so this is Smithsonian Magazine, right? So this is from the Smithsonian. It's not Wikipedia. I'm not copy-pasting Wikipedia. But, of course, Abdul's are going to be saying exactly that in 5 minutes. Now, this church unearthed in Ethiopia rewrites the history of Christianity in Africa. So this is a dig that happened not that long ago. At an archaeological site in Ethiopia, researchers are uncovering the oldest Christian basilica in Sub-Saharan Africa, right? And in the dusty highlands of northern Ethiopia, a team recently uncovered the oldest known Christian church in Sub-Saharan Africa. And it's early, so they're talking now of one of the world's oldest kingdoms, and its early conversion to Christianity. So this kingdom emerged in the 1st century AD and would go on to dominate much of Eastern Africa as well as Western Arabia. We've already shown the maps on that. So this church was built in the 4th century AD, about the same time as when Roman Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity. Constantine did not make Christianity the state religion. He simply legalized its practice. And this is around 337 BC. Right, AD, sorry. It may well be prior, okay? So it may well be prior, but now, so Christianity arrived at an early date nearly 3,000 miles from Rome, and this find suggests that the new religion spread quickly through long-distance trading networks that linked the Mediterranean via the Red Sea with South Africa and South Asia, shedding fresh light on a significant era about which historians know little. Axum was one of the world's most influential ancient civilizations, but it remains one of the least widely known, says Michael Harrower of Johns Hopkins University, the archaeologist leading the team. Your thoughts, Thunderous?
No, it's not the first time that something like that. I remember when Nineveh was founded in the 18th century, but before then, the Bible was mocked about the Assyrian Empire and Nineveh.
Yes.
Then it gets found, and it's now one of the better known world powers from the biblical narrative. I think with this Axum, this is what we're finding now, from what I'm discerning. This too, the more archaeology is researched, the more about this power is going to be unearthed.
Right. Now, they traded by camel, donkey, and boat. Okay, in silver, olive oil and wine from the Mediterranean to cities along the Indian Ocean, which in turn brought back exported iron, glass beads, and fruits. And you can see the crosses here. You can see the cross here. Okay, so a stone pendant with a cross and the term venerable in ancient Ethiopian Gez, right? So the kingdom began its decline in the 8th and 9th century, eventually contracting to control only the Ethiopian highlands, right? Now, they were at one time peaceful with Islam, but of course Islam became more aggressive and the kingdom came under attack from Somali and then Ottoman armies. Now, notice nearly half of all Ethiopians today are members of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo Church. Now, for those of you who don't know, have you heard of the Tawhid, Thunderous?
That would be something to do with the worship of only one God. There's only one.
God is one, Allah is one, Tawhid. For those who are interested, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo Church, this Gez word, is the origin of the word Tawhid in Islam.
I was going to ask you, because we're about to finish now anyway, but I wanted to ask you a question. Yeah. We seem to be finding a lot of words. And now, if anybody that's ever spoken to a Muslim about the Quran, one of the default defenses they have is, well, you've got to understand the Arabic. The root word can have up to 10 different meanings and such. Yes. Are we not seeing historically then, when we bring these things up, that the argument is going to, because they've already set the foundation for one word can have 10 different meanings, that other words that are external to Islam, they're going to use the same kind of arguments with. So
you can have secondary and tertiary meanings, but you will have primary meanings. You're going to have original meanings, early original meanings, right? Yes, so yes, that is true. And Tawhid, we'll get into the meaning of Tawhid. We will come into the meaning of Tawhid, but this is relevant. This is actually, you'll find that this was taken straight out of the Ethiopic Gez. It was the Tawhedo church. This is the source of the term Tawhid. Max 10 asks, were not most of these lands Christian until Mohammedans swept in, who then utilized both them and the Jews for their abilities while slaughtering and enslaving the rest? That's a fairly good summary, I would say. Now, notice, Christianity had reached Egypt by the 3rd century, right? But it was not until Constantine's legalization of Christian observance that the church expanded widely across Europe and the Near East. With news of the Axomite excavation, researchers can now feel confident in dating the arrival of Christianity to Ethiopia at the same time frame. There's a story in the Gospels of a black man, and I believe it's one of the apostles, not Barnabas or something, that actually converts him, and he travels. Yes?
Philip, he ran alongside the Ethiopian eunuch in the Book of Acts, and the Ethiopian eunuch was reading aloud the Book of Isaiah.
Yeah, yes, correct. So the Christianity went to Ethiopia early in the 1st century already. So this finds, to my knowledge, the earliest physical evidence for a church in Ethiopia, as well as all of Sub-Saharan Africa. This is from Aaron Butts, professor of Semitic and Egyptian languages in Washington, D.C. at the Catholic University. Yes?
Can I ask a question? In that sense, then, is there any relationship or any historical evidence that's been found with reference to Judaism? Because if you follow the logic through, the Queen of Sheba came from Ethiopia, paid a lot of respect to Solomon, and then goes back. The eunuch was obviously been to Jerusalem and went to worship at the temple and was on his way back. So there must have been some kind of strand of or should say, there must have been a strand of Judaism in Ethiopia prior to it going into Christianity.
The Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo Church is a little bit Jewish in its practice. Yes, it does retain a very strong Jewish flavor. And we will speak briefly about the Ethiopian influences. We will do that, but that I've got for a separate presentation. But I want to focus on Yemen. I will be touching on Ethiopia. Then we'll focus mostly on Yemen, and later on I will go back to Ethiopia. But Ethiopian Christianity, which has a very strong Jewish element, right, has a strong and direct influence on Islam through numerous people. And yes, we will find that.
Okay.
Yeah. So notice this was home to temples built in a southern Arabian style, dating back many centuries before the rise of Axum. The temples reflect the influence of Sabaeans, who dominated the lucrative incense trade and whose power reached across the Red Sea. Now, what is interesting, the excavators' biggest discovery was a massive building, 60 feet long and 40 feet wide, resembling the ancient Roman style of basilica, which is interesting. Now, what is odd about this is that the Axomite temple at Geha that we spoke about, the temple of Al-Makkah, also happens to be exactly 60 feet long and 40 feet wide. So what they did was they simply took over an old temple of Al-Makkah and they converted it to a church. Now, later on, we will discover that the temple that we call the Kaaba today was once apparently an Ethiopian church that was converted to a mosque. So, yeah, small world. Now, in the research paper, they speak of this unusual collection of artifacts, right? A very unusual collection of artifacts that suggests these are bulls. These are pagan figures, like bulls' heads, pagan figures, right? Gold rings and various other things. So clearly evidence of pre-Christian beliefs, but the paper says that this is a mixing of pagan and early Christian religions. They have evidence in the earliest Christian sites that there was a mixing of Christian and pagan beliefs. In other words, heresy developing, right? So this would then lead to offshoots which are partly Christian, partly pagan, partly whatever the heck they are. Your thoughts, Thunderous?
No, you took the words out of my mind. I was going to say, would this at this point become fractured and splintered, or cause a fracture and splinter?
Yeah, correct. So here's a golden cornelian ring depicting a bull's head, very tiny, from the excavation site. So these guys were able to work. This is 10 mils across. I mean, these guys were able to work. You know, that's fairly fine work for that era. So Christianity first came to Axum in the 4th century when a Greek-speaking missionary named Frumentius converted King Ezana. Okay, so this story is all about this, where we've got the story of Philip, but we know that this was Christian very early on. So this is what makes the discovery of this basilica. It is reliable evidence for a Christian presence northeast of Axum at a very early date. And the spread of Christianity was intertwined with the machinations of commerce. In other words, again, information flowed through commercial networks, right? Religion flowed through commercial networks. Religious ideas, religious symbolism flowed through these commercial networks. Long-distance routes played a significant role in the introduction of Christianity in Ethiopia, and the Axumite kingdom was an important center of the network, of the trading network of the ancient world. This is Alem Seged Barbados, archaeologist at Addis Ababa University. So yeah, not Wikipedia. And I'll pause this here. Your thoughts, Thunderous, on this article.
No, this is new for me, so I've not had time to think about formulating any thoughts on it. So this is new to me now.
Yeah. So I'll pause here. I'll finish this slide just so you know. It's just we touch briefly on the connections to Ethiopia. But the very first hijrah in Islam, the first migration, was to Ethiopia. The first hijrah, the first migration in Islam was to Abyssinia, to Ethiopia. Muslims found refuge in Christian Axum, Ethiopian Eritrea, in 614 AD, and a large number of them stayed there for 14 to 15 years, influenced by this kingdom. When the apostle saw the affliction of his companions, and that, though he escaped it because of his standing with Allah and his uncle Abu Talib, he could not protect them, so he said, if you were to go to Abyssinia, for the king will not tolerate injustice, and it is a friendly country. How did he know? Why were they friendly? How were they friendly to him? He knew the religion. His companions went to Ethiopia. This was the first hijrah. Yes?
I wanted to ask now, considering the locality of Ethiopia to Saudi Arabia, I've often wondered why is it then that Ethiopia, if I understand this correctly, is the longest Christian country in history? It's basically been Christian since it's become a state religion up until now. It's not been anything else. And why is Saudi Arabia and Islam historically kind of like kept away from it? Is there some kind of like, I wouldn't say pact, because obviously we're generations away, but some kind of historical respect in why
they did try to take over the country. There are a number of Muslims in the country, but a large number of Ethiopians are obviously Christian, following the Tahir Church. But I don't know. I mean, there's certainly links going way back from family intermarrying to economic and trade links, support during war, and so on. So yeah, I mean, Ethiopians were often the soldiers who protected the trade caravans. They were people. In fact, one of them repaired and built the Kaaba, right? Muhammad's wet nurse, who was with him from birth until death, was Ethiopian, right?
What
and there are
about
numerous references to Muhammad hearing the Bible being recited by Ethiopians. Now, what is interesting is people debate whole day about the Bible. There was no Bible, no Arabic Bible. Well, Muhammad, according to the Islamic sources, spoke Ethiopian. The two languages Muhammad spoke was Arabic and Ethiopian, and he used to listen to these people when they had their services, right? And they would paraphrase the Bible into Arabic, and also he would listen to two brothers recite the Bible. So there would be this link. Now, in Arabic, al-hijra where Muhammad's followers, the Sahaba, fled the persecution of the ruling Quraysh tribe. There's some interesting information about them we should also discuss at some point. The Axomite king who received them is known in Islamic sources as the Negus, or the Najasi. Right? Some of the exiles returned to Mecca. They made the 622 to Hijrah to Medina with Muhammad. Others remained in Abyssinia until they came to Medina in 628. In other words, they stayed there for 14 years. So I'll pause here. So any final thoughts before we go?
No, it's been a fascinating historical discussion, and very, very well researched.
Thank you. So thanks, guys. That's the first part of this. I'll pause here. So Josie Wells says Ethiopia, Eritrea, even the word Addis Ababa has Arabic roots. There's Islam across the Red Sea. Well, the thing is that a lot of words, a number of words that people use here. For instance, have a look at this list. Let me just go back here. Let's have a look at this list here. Right. You'll notice Islam. This is from the book Foreign Words in the Quran by Arthur Jeffrey. Right. If you look at my community page, you'll find this. I'll drop the link in the chat, in the comments later. But notice you have Syriac, Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, Ethiopic, right? There's hundreds of Ethiopic words and also a lot of Greek words. We have to ask ourselves, why are there so many Greek words, right? And I will talk about that and I will get into that. By the way, I had finally, after 6 months of back and forth, I finally met with Jay Smith. We recorded 2 episodes a couple of days ago and those should be aired next week, I believe. It remains to be seen, and he's on a visit outside of the country right now. So once he's back, we will continue in 2 weeks. And yeah, I will be talking about this Greek connection because it is very possible, very historically possible. Because why are there 205 Greek words in the Quran? Well, because there were strong connections to Greece, oddly enough, and especially the philosophy of Neoplatonism. Right, so there's a connection there, and it's very, very possible that the founder of Neoplatonism is at least one of the people used as a template to model the Muhammad that we know. If you look at the parallels, it's actually very, very unusual and very interesting. So the founder of Neoplatonism may well be one of the people, and I will be presenting that when I talk with Jay Smith once that comes out as we go through the episodes. And also I'll be talking to Al-Fadi tomorrow, and I'm supposed to be recording on Wednesday and also doing some live streams with him. So guys, we'll see how that goes. Any final thoughts, Thunderous, before I run off? Did I answer that question?
Yep. No, you have done. The only I think I've made a comment before. The whole language thing with Muslims and Islam doesn't make sense. If Adam was the first man speaking Arabic, direct Arabic from heaven onto earth, and 21 generations later we have Yasser Qadi, where I put the clip up on my channel where he says that the Arabic language reached its peak with Muhammad. But surely that peak would have been
wasn't even completed at that point.
No, exactly. So it kind of goes to show that the Islamic narrative contradicts itself, because Adam was the first man. It would have reached its peak then when Adam was the first man on the planet. So we have to ask Muslims more questions about this Arabic language. And if it reached its peak with Muhammad, then why are we finding all these alien words inside the text?
Correct. Yeah, and Indonesians don't speak Arabic. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, those are very good questions. I mean, really, you've raised some very, very strong points. Marcus Steiner, thank you very much. Yeah. So guys, I will call it here. We might come back in the week. I've just got a very busy week, as you know. Adam was not the first man, according to Islamic sources. Muhammad was the first creation of Allah. So he was there at the beginning. Yeah.
But that's a discussion in itself that I've wanted to do with you about the light of Muhammad, or Muhammad being the light. But that'll be for another time.
Cool. So who was the first man according to Islamic sources? Josie Wells. Yeah, Islam is a mixture of everything. Yeah, and Arabic is a mixture too. Those are correct on both counts. I believe that is an accurate statement. So yeah, guys, I need to call it. Adam was not the first man according to Islamic sources. I'm not talking about that. Okay, I'm not sure I understand, Eva, but yeah, drop it in the comments later. Muhammad goes back over 100,000 years. Muhammad goes back to the formation of the universe, Lydia. So that's the light of Muhammad. You don't understand. Muhammad is very, very. Adam received earth after someone. Yeah, so the earth was made for Muhammad. Muhammad
Can
was
I,
there at the beginning. Allah spoke to Muhammad and said, Muhammad, I'm going to make the universe, I'm going to make earth for you. And then Allah made the earth, and then afterwards, he placed Muhammad on the earth as a
but
physical human being. Yeah?
But just on us, I know we don't want to digress because it's a subject to stuff. But if
Right.
you go to my channel, there's actually a discussion by Yasser Qadi that says that the jinn were on Earth before Adam was, and they had their own wars and things on the planet. Which, interestingly, there's no archaeological evidence of these wars and jinns. But hey ho, that's Islam.
Don't confuse us with the facts, okay? There were humans on earth. Oh, good grief, this has made the jinn. So, yeah, Islam gets confusing, but guys, we'll talk about this. Was he? Yes, yes, on Nathaniel. Muhammad was Allah's companion. And in fact, look, very quickly, because I want to go, but Allah is aloof. No one knows where Allah. Where's Allah? Nobody knows, right? Allah is missing. He's aloof. Unfortunately, that is the way that it's seen in Islamic theology. So Allah's power is gone, right? So who runs the universe in Allah's absence? Well, there's a guy called Muhammad who just happens to be free right now. And you see, Allah's power keeps keeps the planets spinning in their orbits, and it keeps them turning on the axes. And well, with the absence of Allah, who's going to do that? Well, thank you, Muhammad. We appreciate you using the spirit of Muhammad, the Ruh Muhammadi, to do that while Allah is taking a holiday. That is Muhammad in Islam.
Isn't there a guy in the Bible that speaks like that or is spoken of like that?
You know, there's a guy, but he's not as powerful as Muhammad. There might be a guy. You know, there might be
Is
a
that
guy.
the one? Is that the one that stands behind Muhammad while Muhammad is leading the prayer?
Prayers, that guy. Yeah, I think that guy. This is a very Veronica. Yes, this is an incredibly bad copy of the Trinity. It is seriously. I should take you through those sources. It's incredible. Muhammad is what moves the earth. He's what moves the moon. He's what moves the tides. He is the primum mobile. He's the force that moves everything, that keeps the clockwork of the universe running in Allah's absence. It's His power. In the absence of Allah, it's Muhammad's power that keeps the earth, keeps the universe running. Believe it or not. Guys, I need to go. So thank you all very much for your time. I hope it's been interesting. Thunderous, thank you for the very, very enlightening questions. Man, those questions, yeah, those hit hard. And thank you very much. So
No, but
thanks,
my
guys.
pleasure. And I'd like to say thank you to the audience, to all those that are listening now and participated. Big shout to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Take care, guys. Good night. God bless.